Hi, this is Deanna with Divine Destiny. I'm coming to you today with a heart to heart. If you hear cars go by or whatever, just kind of real and raw channel. But I'm coming on with a very strong passion of mine today, and I find it very relevant to this page being Empowering Empaths. And the reason I am saying this is because the suicide rates in United States is increasing. Um, and I really want to point out that it's a family issue. It's a societal issue. It's a cultural issue. And this is a passion of mine because everything goes back to child wounds. And expressing this is not to blame, but it's more from a perspective of a heart space to bring awareness to everybody that we all have childhood wounds and how we can change this ever-growing rate of emotional distress in our children is to talk about it really, really real and raw. And when I say it goes back to childhood wounds, I'm going to hold myself accountable as a mother who's lost my son. He transitioned himself via suicide in 2014. And I'm going to pause right there by we have to change everything in the family dynamics, in the society, in the cultural, specifically talking about the United States today. Because for so very long, it's even the words carry energy. And you see it even on TV, and you see people all the time saying, so-and-so committed suicide. And the reason I want to bring this to your attention is the definition of commit is a crime. And specifically speaking for my son, he was the farthest thing from a criminal. And so I started bringing awareness within me about this because I used to use the term together myself. As I word it differently, like he transitioned via suicide or he passed by suicide. Commit was a term that they used to use back in the day of oppression, which we still are oppressed, to keep the people that were in poverty and losing hope from taking themselves out, because then that would be less tax money to whoever the powers that be, right? Like the 1%ers of today, whoever they are. And so committed suicide came about by them because they didn't want people who were hungry, who were emotionally distraught, to check out, because that would mean less money via taxes paid into this system. So that awareness is one thing I want to get across. The second thing with this being, society also likes to say mental illness, and I have to beg to differ. I would like you to just hear me out on my perspective of this. I'm speaking from it hitting so close to home because I've been suicidal before. I have been, my son obviously was and left. However, he wasn't mentally ill. And society labels it mentally ill without really wholeheartedly educating themselves on what it is. It's a society and a family issue. Going back to the childhood wounds, this is going to be more than a one-part video series on this subject of emotional health because I have a lot to say about it. And the pressures in the United States specifically, you know, our children go through school and, oh, you're 18 now or 17 now, you're graduating, you're an adult. No, you're not. And neither was I. Look back at your life at 17, 18. Did you know what you really wanted set in stone? And so there's a lot of pressure on these children because they get done with all their schooling and then they go like society says I'm an adult. And I'm not sure what I want to do. They're not figured out within themselves who they truly are at that age. I know I didn't. And I know I'm kind of bouncing around here, but my guts have been shaking because I still just, 5 years later that my son transitioned himself, I just scratched my head in disbelief of the ignorance, with all respect, ignorance on this subject and the stigma of this subject. It comes from core wounds. It comes from myself. I'm just going to say it like this. I had unhealed childhood wounds. I had children with somebody else that had a hole in their soul and wasn't living their best self that they could. I was seeking I was emotionally codependent, and I had children, and I didn't know this. None of this makes sense to me while I was in it, but it does now. And not being in that emotional connection with the mother specifically first creates, if there's a disconnect there, and it can be subtle. It can be of the mother just not looking into the infant's eyes and making them feel safe. And society has definitely gotten very, very minimal on what the true purposes of people transitioning them by suicide. And if we have been getting it right, then the numbers wouldn't be going up as they are. I know I'm back and forth a little bit. My nervous system is like, this is so passionate to me today to share this in this first video of a many series. And the reason I'm saying this in this empath group is, first of all, so you know who I am in my authenticity and what fueled me to start this channel, because my son was an empath. I'm an empath, always very sensitive, always in tune, always very strong in feelings. However, from the childhood wounds, I wasn't allowed to speak my feelings. I wasn't allowed to question things, and that's how I'm wanting to express to you that it can be so very subtle. And when you're not in a healthy family dynamic, you just don't even realize. The chaos of my life exploded, imploded in 2014 when I found my child at 20 years old. The bottom line of my accountability, because the ignorance and the stigma with suicide is nobody understands it, because people who were supposed to be my family, my friends, everybody that you are supposed to be the closest with, are so ignorant in the subject that they literally blame me, the only parent that physically raised my child. And everybody's accountable. This is a society issue. This is a family issue. This is a cultural. I know I'm a little bit all over the place, but I do want to give statistics in the United States on this, because if it can happen to my son, a very sensitive soul, an empath, a very feminine, intuitive, very listening to his internal dialogue, and he got confused because our society is so corrupt, and we find in the United States the value of who you are is what you obtain in material things, and your status of, oh, my last name is so and so, that makes me somebody. Well, empaths feel through that shit, and the confliction within him is his heart couldn't make sense of what he was seeing with his two eyes, what he was feeling, because of all the people in the unhealed wounds of family dynamics who never hold themselves accountable. And nobody held themselves accountable when my son transitioned. Everybody pointed the finger at the very parent that raised him by myself the best that I could do, trying to be the mother and the father, the provider, the nurse, the teacher, the taxi, the foundation And so how I hold myself accountable is, yeah, I do have a part in my son not being here. I'm dumbfounded. I'm dumbfounded on the ignorance with this subject, because not only am I owning my part in it, but I'm looking around and those that are supposed to love me blame me. And I have survivor's guilt. And so this added family dynamics gone wrong has hindered the healing process for me. And I'm sure it's this way for many people who have been suicidal themselves or lost hope themselves or struggle with anxiety and depression. And all of those languages of anxiety, depression, and escapism and disassociation comes from a core wound from your childhood. And that's a fact. And it can be subtle. It can be as subtle as, oh my God, I'm being gaslighted, or I'm being shamed for having feelings that I'm trying to vocalize, or not being allowed to speak your feelings, to the extremes of physical abuse, sexual abuse. And with my family dynamic in my child, my part in that is because I was wounded. I didn't get the emotional stability at a very young age. And I had children with somebody else that was broke. And the dynamics of all the family dynamics that have gone wrong is that every person that was ever in my child's life or in your life needs to hold themselves accountable. It's not one person's fault. And so the statistics in the United States alone, and this one was printed out from 2017, it was the closest one I could find, but there were 47,173 recorded suicides. That has increased since 2014. And in 2014, it was 42,773. And one of those was my child. So that goes to show you that it's going up. And as a society, as an individual, as a family, as a culture, on this great land they call the United States, it's a huge society issue, because nobody's getting to the core wounds of why these children or individuals are losing hope. And I'm very aware of it, being an empath, now that I'm awake. That jolted me into my awakening. So on average, adjusted for highest rate recorded in 28 years. So what they're saying is in 2017, at that point, it was 28 years, and it was the highest rate recorded. In 2015, suicide was the 7th leading cause of death for males and the 14th leading cause for females. And I specifically know this, that the males in our society are groomed into, oh, you're an adult now. You got to have it all figured out. You got to be the provider of yourself. You're not a man unless you have this, and this, and the monetary. And so that, to me, another thing is, oh, you're a male, suck it up. Oh, you're a male, you can't have feelings and emotions. And if you're voicing that you do, you're a wussy, or you're this or that or the other. That's the huge demise with the males specifically being higher, because they have divine feminine, divine masculine, both within them, just like we do. And this society specifically is out of balance. They're out of balance. And so the males feel a huge cross and a whole lot of heavy weights on their shoulders, specifically when they're almost towards the end of high school and they're getting pushed out into the society of 17, 18, and now you're an adult. And they're not. They're still children. So bring that awareness within you and try to... You don't have to corral your children into a box of saying, okay, you're done with high school. You got to do this, you got to do that. It's creating pressure within these children. The second leading cause of death for young people age 15 to 34, and the third leading cause of death for those between the ages of 10 and 14. Tell me that there's not core wounds when children, I've seen them as young as 7, that have transitioned themselves by suicide. And when we want to get into the blame game and the pointing the fingers to one specific person, I'm going to challenge you today to really pause and think of how ignorant that is to blame one person when the statistics show that it's going up. How I'm holding myself accountable today as being a better me. I have a lot of healing to do. The narcissistic wounds that I've experienced from a very young age has brought my awareness to why I don't have memory of a lot of things in my childhood. To realize that abuse can be as subtle as a mother who's not healed and she's starting to reproduce children. And that's definitely in the dynamics of my lineage. But the difference is when my beautiful best friend, my child at 20 years old, transitioned himself. I want to go back. My son transitioned in 2014 in September. In July, he was working out of state. He phoned me and did express to me that he was struggling and that he didn't want to be in the state that he was in and that he would rather be closer to home. And so I did know he was struggling a little bit in July. But what he voiced to me was that he just wanted to be closer to home. My husband, myself, encouraged him to do that. That would be just fine. When he did come home, I had the open line of communication with him if he needed to talk about what he was going through or what he was struggling with, or that if he needed any help. And so the open dialogue with me was I didn't ignore that. I didn't know how extreme it was. He came home, he started doing his thing here, seemed to be doing quite well. And then in September, I was having communication with my son before I went to bed. Told him I loved him, he loved me, just said he was going to listen to some music. I went to sleep, and I woke up in the morning and found him. So my point of this is the signs, if somebody's struggling or you're struggling, can be very subtle. I look back at photos now and I can see in his face that he was struggling, but I didn't ignore the fact when he did verbalize to me just months prior that he was struggling. And with him being welcome to come back home and just figure things out, and me verbalizing that open communication with him, he actually appeared to be doing really good. He just purchased himself a car. And even the night that I went out and spoke to him, the signs are not always like, boom, I'm suicidal. And so I really want to bring that to your awareness. I'm going to end this soon because I want to keep these a little bit shorter. There's going to be another part to this video. My passion and my whole purpose of this today is to, as hard as it is to face your own wounds that are within you, it's really super important to do that because it's impacting not only you and you not being able to live in your authenticity, but it's also impacting our children and family dynamics, society issues, cultural, and specifically for the United States. It always goes back to core wounds. I wasn't even aware of how deeply oppressed I was my whole first 40 years of my life. I only knew conditional love, like, do this and this and this and you'll please me. This is how subtle it can be. To shaming me for trying to speak my feelings, and what's worse than that for us empaths is to not be able to vocalize our feelings with people that make us feel safe. And that's another dynamic where I'm holding myself accountable, because as my child's mother, my whole upbringing, my whole from home to school to crappy, unhealthy relationships was I never felt like I could trust anybody. I always had a sense of betrayal, like anybody will screw you over. That was deeply ingrained in my childhood. It always goes back to childhood. And like I said, this isn't to shame, blame. It is what it is. If you can go forward on your healing path and be able to bridge with those that are supposed to be family, that's great. But if you have any narcissistic traits in the bloodline, they'll deny it and continue to gaslight. And all of this that I'm walking into my authenticity and holding myself accountable has to do with the empath, because my child was so very sensitive. He mirrored exactly my sensitivities. And I didn't even know I was in this condition of family dynamics gone wrong until he left and I had a spiritual awakening. Empaths have to decompress. Empaths have to be in their authenticity, because if not, it causes us to either implode or explode, or both, where everything becomes chaos and you lose hope yourself. So I'm going to end this one now and begin another one. I hope you enjoy this video. It's a very important topic, because we are all to be held accountable for the suicide rates today. It's people losing hope because they know this society's not going on authenticity and what matters truly here from a heart space. It's all about monetary and, oh, we're so great, and no, we're not. When there's people who are living high on the hog at the 1%ers, and people in the same chunk of land that calls themselves so free starving and living out of boxes, it's not great. And the suicide rates have gone up. It's a society issue just as much as it is a family issue. Look for part 2 coming up. I send this to you with so much love. Blessings.